We live in a world where 1 in every 3 women has suffered from some form of gender-based violence in her lifetime. Unfortunately, South Africa is becoming an increasingly unsafe place for women to live in. Now, according to Statistics South Africa, women are 5 times more likely to be killed due to gender-based violence committed by men. Ryan Smith is the founding member of Cause for Justice, a human rights and public interest organization. He currently serves as the CEO and the legal counselor. Ryan, when we look at the root issues of gender-based violence, does pornography have an influence on rape and sexual assault in our country?
Yes, Leomi, sadly the reality is that pornography does play a significant part in the perpetration of various kinds of sexual abuse, assault and violence. And I can only refer to research to back that statement up. We know that one of the leading researchers in South Africa in this field, a lady by the name of Dr. Antoinette Besson at UNISA's Youth Research Unit, she did a PhD study where she went into the prisons and actually spoke with perpetrators of sexual assault to get an understanding of what are the motivators, what are the driving factors that led these criminal minds to perpetrate these crimes. And she found that I think it was in the region of 90 to 95% of cases that these individuals had pornography as a cause or a contributing cause for leading into their actions, their criminal actions. So that is unfortunately the reality that, and we all know this because we live in a capitalistic system where all companies and institutions have advertising and marketing budgets, right? The reality is that media has an influence on people's attitudes and behaviors. And in the same way, pornography obviously is delivered by way of the media. It's a form of expression. It has an influence on the viewer. And so this is what we see in the studies and in the research, is that pornography plays a significant role in rape and other forms of sexual crime.
Cause for Justice has interacted with a lot of research on this theme, as you just mentioned. What are some of the most profound findings you've uncovered thus far?
Yeah, so there's a wide range of research that has been done in many countries across the world. Most of it has been done in the Western world, and the reason for that is quite obvious, that these are the countries where you've got the most pornography being disseminated, produced in those societies. If I can touch on 3 specific studies, and I think it will be helpful to actually read the actual outcomes of these studies. I will just touch on 3. The one is a 2010 analysis of the 50 most popular pornographic videos that's available on the internet. They found that in 88% of scenes there was physical violence, and in 49% there was verbal aggression. 87% of the aggressive acts were perpetrated against women. Those were the actual, let's say, victims, or the person towards it was focused. And in 95% of the cases, the women's response was either neutral or expressing pleasure, right? So this does not make sense. Why a women would, in normal circumstances, when violence and aggression is directed at the person, would either respond neutrally or respond, expressing pleasure. But that is the nature of pornography. It is not normal sex. It is a form of extreme, you can call it a kind of fantasy, right? But it's a very vile and degrading kind of fantasy. Then the second study is a meta-analysis. So it's a study of studies that was done, took 47 studies and reported that the effects of exposure to pornographic material are clear and consistent, and that pornography use puts people at increased risk of committing sexual offenses and accepting rape myths.
Sure.
So rape myth is the idea that women actually enjoy rape. And so this is, what comes out of the studies, that people who are exposed to the material, that they or at increased risk of committing sexual offences themselves, or they think that women will actually enjoy being raped. The third and final one I would touch on here is that a 2015, another meta-analysis of 22 studies, and it covered 7 countries, found that internationally the consumption of pornography was significantly associated with increases in verbal and physical aggression. And actually this was among males and females. We know that the vast majority of pornography, let's talk about adult pornography as a genre or a group of material, because you also get what is called child pornography or child sexual abuse material. But within that band of, let's call it adult pornography, the majority of that is a heterosexual situation where you have either one or more men committing sexual acts with a woman, and so when we talk about who the act is perpetrated against, it would in most instances be a woman, in the material that you see.
Sure. I think you've already answered this question, but would you say that porn causes increased verbal and physical aggression, and why specifically?
Yeah, so we know from the studies, we know the answer is yes, right? And maybe what we can touch on is the why, and it comes back to the point about the impact of media on people's attitudes and behaviors. That is a set reality across the board, irrespective of what kind of material you are talking about. Whether it be, someone advertising a overseas holiday or, just a normal household product. The fact is that the way advertising and marketing is focused, and the work that goes into that, it will have an impact, or it's supposed to have. Otherwise, companies are just wasting their money on putting out budgets every year for advertising and marketing. So that's the one reality. But then there's a second reality to it, and that is the nature of the material itself. If we look at other kinds of marketing, right, it focuses on a product or an experience, and in most instances, those products and experiences, they are neutral in nature, in the sense that it doesn't communicate necessarily a moral message to you. With pornography, it's not the case. The message communicated, if you take a view from a distance, you will see that the message is inherently misogynistic. It is focused on women being used, and in some cases abused, for the sexual gratification and pleasure of men, right? So the message itself is not neutral. It is a very, I'm struggling for the right word, but the message itself is toxic. It actually encourages a toxic masculinity, a toxic way of relating within in the sexual relationship with a partner of the female sex. So I think that plays a lot into the why the studies reveal what they do reveal.
Now, Ryan, what are the effects of pornography on someone who only watches porn occasionally and doesn't see themselves as addicts? I think that's most people out there. Addicts is this warning sign word, and I don't want to classify myself as that.
Yeah, so I think, again, looking at the studies, it is clear that as pornography use or exposure increases, the impact on attitudes and behavior increases. So if we're talking about someone who views the material occasionally, the impact on the person's attitudes and behaviors will be less than someone who watches it more frequently or watches more extreme kinds of material. The reality, unfortunately, is that pornography impacts the human brain in the same way as substance dependence, or let's call it addiction-forming substances, affects the brain. So it is called by some in the field, it's called the new drug, right? So it impacts the brain in the same way as you would find, heroin or cocaine or some other substance affects the brain, because it hijacks the reward system. The brain is trained that if I use this and it's coupled with, in the case of someone who masturbates, with that release of orgasm, then it creates a path in the brain, says this is rewarding. So the brain obviously goes and seeks after that. And what it does, it then, it takes over the, let's call it the brain's thinking center, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, because the brain gets trained in a different way to go for rewards. So this is the reality, that someone who watches pornography occasionally will find it very, very hard to keep on only watching it occasionally. It's very difficult because the brain is being trained to go after a reward, and you know the brain is good at that. You know, it's a survival instinct. At the end of the day, those endorphins and dopamine, all the things that are released, it's there for a good purpose, because it teaches you that if you do this thing, say if you eat, you stay alive, and if you you know, do whatever, you know, practice sport, your muscles get built up, your chances of survival becomes better. So there's a good reason why the brain functions like it does, but pornography hijacks that system. So the person who watches pornography occasionally will struggle to only keep watching it occasionally. And then if we say about someone who doesn't view themselves as an addict, that is a very subjective, let's say, determination. You can't really judge yourself when it comes to that kind of question. And of course, there are medical models to determine when someone's behavior and choices and so on has escalated to the point where it's compulsive in nature, or it's addictive in nature, where there's, you know, the normal control faculties of the brain, you know, doesn't function properly anymore. But yeah, so the answer is basically that. You are either going in the direction of watching more pornography or going in the direction of watching less. But there's no point where you can say, okay, this is my settled point of where I am comfortable and feeling well at watching this amount of pornography. It doesn't work.
Now, Cause for Justice aim to protect and promote the constitutional rights and freedom of each member of society. For more information on their work, we want to encourage you to visit causeforjustice.org. They're also on Facebook and Instagram.